Hello and welcome. My name is Richard Barron Cox, and welcome to this, the third lecture in our series for the course on drought. We want to thank you for registering and for taking this course and for being with us today. Today we will focus on the importance of drought to you. In other words, why do you need to understand drought and why do you need to pay attention to it? Well, there's a very simple answer to that, to be honest with you. The first reason, in terms of the simple answers, the first reason is that droughts are real. They're not the imagination of anyone. They're real, right? People suffer from them. The environment suffers from it. People die because of droughts, okay? So they're real. That's the first thing. The second reason is that droughts affect most of us on this planet, if not all of us, at one point or the other. It does. And if something affects you and affects you negatively, you would want to address it, naturally speaking, logically speaking. So that's the second reason. Thirdly, whether you believe this or not, the science tells us that droughts are going to increase. Yes, they are going to increase. And do you know why that is going to happen? That is going to happen because of something called climate change. So the global situation as regards drought is going to do what? It's going to get worse, right? And from all of that, we do know that drought would affect us, humanity, more and more, and the environment in which we live, including our ecosystems. And this is why drought is important to us. But that is the short answer. That is the simple answer. Can we look a little bit closer? Let's look geographically why drought is important to us. Well, in the past, many people thought that drought is only a problem for the dry lands. This was false. This is false. Drought happened around the world. A matter of fact, history tells us drought happened in Ethiopia, also in China. Drought happens in the Caribbean, also in Europe, all over this globe, right? There have been experiences of drought, save and except a few places. But generally speaking, that is what has happened, right? Outside of that, a lot of people don't seem to understand that because of climate change, because of the changes that are taking place in the climate, there are going to be seasonal changes. So in the past, when you thought that drought would only last between, let's say, May and June, it might be extended further. Outside of that, places that never had drought would now have drought, right? Because their climate is changing because of this process we call climate change. So regions and peoples, countries that were never affected or that were mildly affected by drought could now expect that this is going to change and going to change how? Not for the better, for the worse. So geographically speaking, what we are going to see in the future is an expansion of drought. An expansion in every sense. They're going to be longer, they're going to be more severe, and they're going to attack greater land mass. And therefore, many more of us will suffer directly or indirectly from drought. And you might say, well, the rains would finally come. And that's true. The rains might finally come. And when they do come, if they come in torrents, right? If they come really heavy, this is not a solution to the problem. This might even cause more problem. How? So you ask me, what do I mean by that? Well, listen to me. After a very long drought, the soil, the ground is so hard that when the rain pours, it is as if it's pouring on concrete. So it just runs off, right? And that can cause flooding, and flooding can lead to what? Death. So you see, geographically speaking, this is what we have, and this is what we're going to deal with. But it's just geographics. Let's deal with the economics of it, right? Well, you might not believe this, but drought are very, very expensive economically speaking. A matter of fact, the stats that I have looked at, the figures I have looked at, tells me that India, Europe, and the United States together, over the last 30 years, have lost about $435 billion thanks to drought. Yes, $435 billion. So you see what we are talking about. A matter of fact, the figures would show that drought are more expensive to us than hurricanes, typhoons, earthquakes, and floods. Yes, that's what the statistics show. So you see, economically speaking, drought is serious business. And listen to me, the more prolonged they are, in other words, the longer they are, and the more intense they are, it is the more they're going to cost us economically. A matter of fact, they can wreak economic havoc on the entire economy of a country or a region. And we have seen that historically. I suppose you know about the Bengal in India during the Second World War and what happened there, right? So what we are seeing here is that economically, drought forces us to change our lifestyle. Drought forces things upon us which we don't want because there is a shortage of water first and foremost. Temperature rises and so on. But that is economically. Can we turn a little bit to the social part of it? Now, if we turn to the social part of it, drought affects from health to education. You cannot run a hospital without water, You cannot run a school without water. As a matter of fact, I'm from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is an archipelago in the Caribbean. And listen to me. When I was a child, the smaller islands of St. Vincent, quite often during the summer months when we had periods of drought, the schools would have to be closed in these smaller islands and the hospitals. Guess why? Because there was no water. You cannot run a school or a hospital without water. Outside of that, a shortage of water threatens the entire hygiene of any region that is suffering that. You would recall, I'm sure, that in the COVID-19, one of the first ways of dealing with that, of stopping the spread, was to do what? Wash your hands. And what do you need? Water to wash your hands. A matter of fact, it is impossible, generally speaking, to have really proper hygiene at a national level, at a universal level, without water. And when hygiene standards fall, guess what happens? There is the spread of what? Disease. We just mentioned COVID-19. So you see, socially speaking, right, drought costs us a lot. But outside of that, when you have a drought, people sometimes are forced to leave where they live because they don't have any water, they don't have any food, and they go somewhere else. So what we have is what is called what? Migration. And you know what can happen from migration sometimes? Sometimes we have conflicts because new people come here, they're competing for resources, and bang, trouble in town. You understand what I'm saying, right? So drought forces changes in social relations, right? Changes that we don't necessarily want, okay? And environmentally, let's speak a little bit about the environment. With a drought, first thing that happens is that water levels go down. So sometimes rivers dry up. I have seen that myself. Lakes dry up. I have also seen that myself, okay? Outside of that, plants and animals die. A matter of fact, the UNCCD was established because of what took place in the Sahel in the 1970s. You had serious drought there, and the land basically died. And so animals died, right? Plants died, and guess what? People died. And so that gave birth to what we know today as the UNCCD, okay? So environmentally speaking, right, when drought really takes toll, it's not just us human beings, right? But the entire ecosystem suffers. And once the ecosystem suffers, we will also suffer because we cannot live without our ecosystem, okay? There are other impacts of drought, political impacts, for example. But in a future lecture, we will deal in greater detail with what is called the cascading impacts of drought. But for today, we would leave it there. So until the next lecture, which will be on areas of the world which are affected by drought, and we might well be visiting your country. You never know. Until that time, let me remind you that in taking this course, should you have any difficulty, please give us a call at this number or send us an email at this address, and we will answer you within 48 hours. That's the first thing. Secondly, we want to remind you that you should share this course with your friends, within your networks and so on, because drought is everybody's business. Until next time, I am Richard Byron Cox.
You got me on.